This is the Roller Coaster Podcast, and I'm your host, Lucy Q. Life is a wild ride. It has twists and turns. It's scary, exciting, and downright fun. So throw your head back, arms in the air, and come along with me for the ride.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride.
Episode 200 of the roller coaster will soon be here, and this is your chance to be part of the fun. I'm going to be recording this episode with coaches and listeners just like you. If you want to be part of the fun, head over to nectargrowth.com. Sign up for free and RSVP for the November 18th event. All of the details will be under the events tab. I can't wait to see you there. What are you waiting for? Come join us. You know you're worth it.
Ride.
If you were abducted at the age of 5, would you say that it was the greatest thing that ever happened to you? What about if you found yourself in an African prison? Are you going to say that it was a good time, a great thing that happened? Joining me today is Aaron Young of Catalyst Coaching to share his remarkable story of abduction, prison, and how he found heaven in what appeared to be hell. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks, Lucy. It's always an interesting thing to have an introduction read about yourself because it's another person's perspective and it sends a shiver through my spine in a really good way every time. I'm humbled and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share my experience on my life.
Do you sometimes feel like when somebody reads it to you, does it sometimes feel like, well, who are they talking about?
It's weird. I listen to it and I'm very blasé about everything that's happened to me because it was a, perfectly roller coaster. It was. My life for 47 years has been, and much of it by my own poor choices because of my early childhood. And it's only been the last sort of 7-8 years I've been able to go back and say that these are the greatest things that ever happened to me. But for much of my life, it was driving the bus, so to speak. That's what I explain to people. It was the little driver. And I'm going left instead of right and right instead of left at every opportunity, and it took me that 7 years ago to realize now listening to it that it is my life. And, one of the most beautiful parts of why I can say it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me is because I get to do this. I get to show people that 1, nothing is impossible, and 2, that there isn't a single situation in your life that you cannot turn into a positive and you cannot use as fuel to actually create momentum to go forward, not go backwards, not get stuck, not find yourself wallowing in the victim and saying, poor me, but in propelling you into greatness, even just peace and serenity. It doesn't have to be greatness. It could just be a very relaxed and calm life. But these things that happen.
So why don't we just dive in? And I'm just going to invite you to share your story wherever you want to pick it up and whatever you want to share. I'm really curious to hear about all these things that happened.
Okay, cool. Well, look, let's see what pops up. My mouth moves and I'm lucky my brain doesn't tend to engage too often, which is good. So the stories are very raw and real. And what might happen, and this is a beautiful part of me, is so much has happened. We might see something new in that I don't always talk about the same stuff. I sort of go with the flow. So the reality for me is, as I'm an Australian, I'm 47 years old. I started life in a place called Macquarie Fields in the New South Wales state of Australia, which was and is no longer, but only just recently was the heroin capital of Australia. So I grew up in a very interesting environment, surrounded by a lot of poverty, a lot of crime. The suburb itself was designed off the same architectural designs as Watts in South Central LA, which is a nice piece of information to give you a feel for the mentality of the people in the place. It wasn't as severe as that. Please don't let me draw comparisons to what happened there, but it was that same public housing, poverty, destitution, no hope, a lot of crime, a lot of drugs. My mother is still an addict. She may not use the substance as she did when I was born, but her nature and her behavior still is that of an addict. We need to be careful to understand addiction is not about heroin. It's not about alcohol. It's about a behavior which is searching for happiness or anything outside ourselves to feel whole. You know, whether it's the gym, whether it's running, whether it's heroin, whether it's alcohol, whether it's relationships, whether it's anything that we use obsessively is an addiction. So I grew up in that environment, and sadly that created a little addict, you know, a very scared, very angry young man who moved through his teen years trying to fight that addictive nature, but then fell into crime, fell into what I saw as family, which was just basically the hardest and toughest people that I could find that treated me with any kind of respect, which was something I just didn't get at home. Luckily for me, by the time I hit 20, I'd realized that this was going one way, and it was going one way very quickly. At that point, I'd been lucky not to have been arrested, even though it had been close a number of times. I'd avoided the drugs at this point. I thought that I was not going to fall down that road. In my early 20s, the drugs crept in. Battled my first addiction probably from the age of 21, 22 through till about 27. I won that battle decisively, but then fell into my second addiction, which I didn't at the time know was an addiction, and that was women or relationships. I was a fixer because of my mother and my mother's behavior and my mother's nature. I was looking on the search to fix every broken woman I could find. I needed to find someone who was into drugs, who was into alcohol, that I could sweep off their feet and fix and take away all the pain. Now, we do need to go back. I've swept right over one of the bigger things that is important that you introduced here, and that is the abduction. And I do this. This is the way my brain works. I don't see it as a big deal now, but the truth is, for people outside me, they go, "You're what?" So at the age of 5 in this place called Macquarie Fields, I was abducted by a local teenage boy. I was 5, he was probably 17 or 18. So he dragged me off into the bush. I followed him willingly. I think, like you'll find any story you hear about a young child being abducted, you're not quite sure. These are local neighborhood people. Someone you see every 2-3 weeks, you know, not an uncommon sight. Dragged me into the bush and attempted to molest me. The problem was he picked the wrong person. This was just not going to happen with me. So I fought. The problem was he dragged me off into a part or into the bush where I had no clue where I was. So he just left. He left. And I literally just sat there for the whole day, crying, not knowing where I was and scared to death. He said he'd kill me if I moved. So I just sat in this little thicket, like a round bit of cut out of bush. And I would have sat there forever. I didn't know where to go. I was completely and utterly stuck. He came back just before nightfall, tried again, no success. So then basically told me he was going to kill me. Then from there, obviously he wasn't going to kill me. He never had any intention to. Sadly, I didn't know that at the time. He then told me he would let me go home, but that he promised that I wouldn't tell anybody about what had happened, or he would kill me and my family as well. And I believed it. So he led me out the bush, and then as soon as we were out the other side of it, he ran off, and I went home, and I never told a soul. And that drove the bus for me for many, many years. So aside from my mother and say her lack of being a mother and this event, I was driven by fear and anger. And so my criminal choices and then my drug choices all became about me running away from my mother and running away from this event that had happened to me when I was 5. I got burnt heavily with relationships, as I said, because I kept going into this cycle of looking for broken women to fix. And when I say broken women, I need to stop and be very cautious that I can't blame, not one of those women are at fault for my choices. Their brokenness and their state of where they were at in their journey is not a judgment on my part. I chose them. They didn't choose me. I chose them. It was my journey, my mistakes. So when I say broken, I don't say that in a judgmental or a horrible way towards them. I just say these were the types of women that I was addicted to. I then fell into drugs a second time. These were different type of drugs. This was more of a party scene, and spent only about 8 or 9 months in a frenzied party cycle, 3 days a week. Where again, I was then handed another relationship, which was the most toxic of my life. Again, still unaware of that being an addiction. To fix that and to deal with the cycle that was created, we both jumped on a plane to the Middle East. So we left Australia, no jobs. We just jumped on a plane, sold everything, and went to Dubai. And I spent 3 years in Dubai, being incredibly successful. Managed to find an incredible job, an incredible life, lots of money, lots of cars, lots of flash, lots of travel. I was the top events organizer in the Middle East. So I was pretty much like a little demigod to a certain degree. But at some point, I fell out of love, hit the alcohol pretty hard, which I'd never really done in my life, surprisingly. I'd been more along the drugs and the escape using something heavier, and then fell in love again. Funny, surprise, Aaron. This time it was with an African girl. Now, the financial crisis that hit at that time, I was over there, caused a lot of problems, and people that weren't on first world passports were almost instantly deported. So sadly, I was there at that time, and this girl that I was in love with was on a South African passport. And so when the financial bubble burst there, she was given 30 days to leave the country. I was about to launch and start the first F1 Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi, which would have set me up for the rest of my life. But I wasn't motivated by such things. I was still following my heart. So I followed this girl back to South Africa, on the southern tip of the African continent. We got married there. I fell in love with the African bush. I was right next to a place called Kruger National Park, which is one of the most protected pieces of land left on the African continent, full of every African species you can think of, and found that I had a bit of a knack with elephants and lions, leopards as well. I could track them and locate them a lot easier than most people. And I seemed to just have these incredible sightings that people had spent 30 years trying to get, and I was getting them every day. I fell more and more in love with this. Eventually, my wife at the time, who was originally from a place called Zimbabwe. Now, Zimbabwe is just north of South Africa. It's a country that at one point, and I think even today, is the third poorest nation on the planet. It is rated, I think, the second most corrupt nation on the planet. But Zimbabwe was changing. In early 2000, the dictator there, Robert Mugabe, went on the warpath and killed most of the white farmers he could get his hands on, and the rest fled. He blamed them for what was going on in the country. That was shifting, and so there was a lot of so-called or supposed opportunity in Zimbabwe. So we immigrated to Zimbabwe, but had never been there before. And in Zimbabwe, I found myself falling more and more in love with the African bush. I was spending more and more time up close and personal with elephant, a lot of time with lions, seeing a lot of leopard, and I was barefoot. I was testing my manhood daily. I was just in this environment that I found nothing I'd come across in my life even remotely got me close to the feelings I was getting. I felt whole, is the best way to put it. Now, sadly, in a nutshell, my wife had a substance abuse problem that I wasn't really aware of, because in the Middle East, you don't have access to these things. And we like to drink, but I always thought it was just relatively normal. Once back in Zimbabwe, there was access to these things, and there was a step into that lifestyle. Very quickly, I stepped out of it again and said, it's not something I'm prepared to do. The short story of that is the relationship ended up decaying heavily, very much hers with the attitude that the things that were being done were okay because the people that were being done with were wealthy, successful, leaders of industry. I didn't really care for that. Don't care who it is. It's the same poison in my mind. And so that relationship fell apart. Now, in that relationship falling apart, I was now persona non grata in Zimbabwe, which means that by law, I was supposed to leave. Now, I had nowhere to go. I had no real family, and I poured everything into it. So I cut a deal with the family to not say anything to the immigration department and to leave me an opportunity to reset my life up in Zimbabwe and stay. They took everything, and I kept about $4,000, which was enough, I thought, to start my life over again. Sadly, on the day the divorce was granted, they reneged on the offer, went straight into immigration with the divorce papers and says, this man shouldn't be here, you need to get rid of him. Paid a hefty sum of money, which is the way it works in Africa. You can pay for anything, as you'll soon find out as I go more into my story. And they came after me and said, Mr. Young, you need to leave. I explained my story, I explained the situation, and God moment. They could have literally just put me straight in prison and taken me to the airport, or they could have demanded I pay for a ticket and then taken me to the airport. They didn't. They took me out the back door and said, we believe you. You've always been an honest man when you've been in here. Go and find someone to pay. You can sort this out. You'll find a way around it. So I tried to do that for about a year, dodging the authorities, jumping the borders, having my passport shipped across and re-stamped, getting very close sometimes where they were so close to me, I had to go and live in a tent in neighboring Mozambique. So I would literally cross the border and go and stay at a place called Casamasika in a tent for a few weeks, which for me, again, I was venturing, it was one of the top malaria hotspots in Africa, and I never got malaria. So for me, it was this constant sense of challenge, that addictive personality of being fed, didn't need alcohol, didn't need drugs, because I was constantly on adrenaline and cortisol. Running on the knife edge was my drug now. The problem was it was taking its toll, emotionally and mentally. So after that, I went back to Mozambique and I ended up working in a hunting camp. Short story of that, after about 5 months of watching animals be slaughtered in that manner with absolutely no ethics involved, I was sickened by it and I left. I left Mozambique and went back to Zimbabwe. I mean, I was present for the shooting of an elephant, which was the first time I literally was sickened by it. Also knowing that in Mozambique, the elephant population was almost nil. Northern Mozambique, not too bad, but in the southern parts, there were very, very, very few left, and they were old. These bulls had been around since the dawn of time, and they were being hunted down and shot. The mentality being in the hunting industry, if we don't shoot them, the Africans will. So why would we not get 50 grand for it versus it just be eaten and the ivory ripped off and shipped to China? So the elephants, when you look at it like that, the elephants are screwed either way. And that's what I realized in Mozambique. So I went back to Zimbabwe, landed an incredible job with an ex-combat tracker from the Rhodesian Bush War, a guy in his 70s who taught me how to track, taught me how to relocate animals, move elephants, restock national parks, how to trap, all sorts of, the tools of the trade, which were a dying art. They were gone because no one was really doing them anymore. So I got hands-on experience with every species you could think of, moving them. And it was a beautiful time in my life. And so what happened one day towards the tail end of working for him is there were elephants in a place called Chirundu, which is on the northern border with a place called Zambia, that were being shot. And these elephants had grown up with the white community over there, where there were photos of these elephants as babies, and you can tell by their ear notches. That's how you identify an elephant. And people were sending me pictures and saying, my daughters and my children grew up with this elephant side by side. That was our holiday home. Can you see these pictures? Please, Aaron, you can go up there and you can save them. You can work with Parks and Wildlife. You've got the balls to go up there and take them on. And so I did. Started an organization overnight, and we went up there and we developed tools to teach the elephants to stay out of town. If they didn't cross the borders into town, national parks couldn't shoot them. So it was my job to keep those elephants out of town. And we succeeded. And our methods were so successful, they're used all across Southern Africa today still. They include using chili resins and shooting ping pong balls full of a highly potent chili resin at the elephants. So as the elephant crosses into town, you shoot him with this ping pong ball and it sprays him with this resin. Now he puts his trunk on it and gets a sniff of it. Now it's 10,000 times stronger than Tabasco sauce. So you give yourself a thought of how, even for an elephant, how potent. He realizes
my nose is burning just thinking of it.
Yeah. So what the elephant says is, this is not a fun place to be. No matter how good the free food is, no matter how much I get to be the boss of this place, this is painful. And so they stopped coming. And so we saved at least 7 of the iconic bulls that had been there for 40, 50 years. The matriarch herd, which is the female herd, started bringing their babies into the outskirts of town in special spots. Now, I'll quickly just point out the beautiful part of this is I spent my time chasing these elephants, hammering them constantly on their tail, forcing them away from these people. I would wake up some mornings and in my tent on the river, the Zambezi River there, they would be sleeping or standing beside my tent. I took my sister up there. I hadn't seen in many years for the first time. And I left her in an open area and I walked away from the truck she was sitting in the back of. And the matriarch herd came out and brought their babies to her. Now, elephants know your intention. See, and so do we as humans, but we've lost this. It's long gone in our primal abilities to understand people. I pressured those animals. I mean, you have to understand, I was on their case, like constantly hurting them. Never once did they try and attack me. Never once did they come in. They would come in and pick the table up that we used to fill the ping pong balls and throw it in the river. Stomp on the ground if they smelt the chili resin. But they never ever once attacked us, damaged at home. They never touched the car that we chased them in. Now, an elephant at 45 years old is capable of picking up a 1.5 ton truck and throwing it. Never once did he. Never charged us. Yeah, which is just an insight into elephant behavior and where I started to become a definite elephant behavior specialist, because these sorts of behaviors had never been worked with before. I got to pioneer them with an incredible family up there.
It must have changed you.
Oh man, it did,
Like-
but it also has freaked me out a bit because I had this gift with them, and I'm an Australian, I'm a white guy. You know, like I don't have any training. You know, African's been in the bush his whole life. He's herded goats from the age of 4. So it's his world, and yet I could out-track them, I could out-smell them, I could. Yeah, so it did. It made me realize how powerful our connection as humans is to Mother Nature that we've severed and forgotten about. That we really are part of this great system. You know, whether you're a hippie or a greenie, it's got nothing to do with any of that. It's got to do with the reality is that we are part of nature. But yet we've spent so much time separating ourselves from it, hiding from it, building houses to get above it. You know what I mean? Like focus is disconnecting ourselves from the very thing that keeps us alive.
Yeah, I've noticed where I live right now, I'm on the east coast of Canada in a rural part of Nova Scotia. We'd lived here for about 10 years, went back to where we were in Ontario, into a city, into a suburb. And I didn't realize how important the connection to nature was until I found myself in the suburbs missing something. And it wasn't until we came back to our home here that I finally got it.
Yeah, and the thing is it's amazing how quickly our minds will tell us that the city is better and that being away from a rural life is a good thing, when the reality is just take a child into those two environments and watch the difference. And then you'll see how quickly we should be able to notice that we got it wrong.
Yeah.
A child out in the bush or in nature, in the snow, or out in a forest or whatever, a river, a stream, is a completely different creature to a kid sitting in front of a television or with an iPad. You know, and I watch parents debating now how much iPad time is acceptable for a 2-year-old. And I sit there going, where have we gone wrong so quickly? Because this is not something that's taken 30 years. This has taken 10.
Yeah.
Where now that's a common debate. How much time is okay or acceptable for a 2-year-old? And I'm like, how much time?
It's a bit of a fine line though, because you do have to understand and know technology to be able to exist in the world that we've created. But it shouldn't, technology should be seen as a tool.
Yes, spot on. And the truth is as humans, we're incredibly adaptable. So if you give a child an iPad at 7 or 8, it will be exactly the same as if you gave it to them at 2. You know what I mean? Like adopting, to me, that ability to give a child a screen that early for an extended period of time is literally I just watched my stepson who's of age, because sadly my 2 kids are still trapped back in Africa. And I look at the difference in him when he's in TV or he's got the iPad in front of him versus, say, if I take him outside. Outside, he looks me in the eye. When I talk to him, he looks at me and he listens to what I say, and he can still argue and he can still have his bad days. When he's sitting in front of a screen, he's gone. He is fully focused on what's going on in there. He can't hear a bird, can't hear his brother crying. can't hear his mum calling him. That's the part that I have a problem with, not the technology, because technology, like money, like a lot of the stuff, is just a thing. It's not the thing that's the problem. It's really how we adopt it or how we use it that can become the problem. Money is a beautiful thing. We need it. It's incredibly, it's a gift. But when we use it motivated by the wrong intentions, that's when it turns, you know? So yeah. And I mean, and I know this because I was in a place where money paid for everything, you know? And so when I left the bush, I had to leave the bush because the truth was there's no money in it. You don't get paid to be a conservationist. You don't get paid to chase elephants. You put your own money in most of the time. I went farming in a country which in the early 2000s had basically tried to kill every white farmer they could get their hands on, but it was a new Zimbabwe as far as I thought. And I went onto a farm. I'd never farmed in my life. I went onto a farm that was a couple million US in debt and very quickly turned it into a profitable venture within literally 3.5 months. So I was feeding my addiction, this beautiful side of me that was more challenge. And, you know, the short story of that is the farm was in $2 million in debt because the two directors were thieves. One of them was a drug addict and an alcoholic, and the other one was just a typical white businessman in Zimbabwe who was a thief. That's what they all are. That's how you survive in business in Zimbabwe. You've got to have a thief inside you. So they've both been stealing. And I got stuck in the middle of this, and in the middle of us was this beautiful family, the drug addict's family. Kids were the same age as mine. Wife was there. Drug addict would disappear. I would help raise the kids because she would struggle. And I got caught up in this idea that I could try and help this situation and that everyone could walk away in a fair manner, that they could be paid out for their farm, even though there'd been theft, and that the other director could keep it and turn it into what he wanted, and everyone would walk away happy. The problem was I took my crusader mentality from conservation into the farm. So I cut off all theft. I cut off all political ties. I sacked anyone who brought politics onto the farm. I went to war with this idea that corruption was an acceptable part of Africa, and I stopped it. The problem was I lost sight of the idea that I was one man and Africa is a corrupt continent. And so I won my battle. On the surface, I won it. I mean, my farm was model. I had people phoning me from all over the place. I had people flying up from South Africa to come and visit. I was doing things that no one could do. But what I was also doing quietly in the background was creating a lot of enemies. And so what happens in Africa is politics changes very quickly. Overnight, the politics changed, and the people that I'd cut off and upset became the men in power. And the short of it is they came gunning for me. They arrested me. They tried to beat me into leaving the country, where I refused because I wasn't going to leave my kids behind. They then charged me with a host of charges, from fraud to counterfeiting to pretty much whatever they could, as many big numbers in sentencing as they could. But as with Africa, I bribed my way out of prison, and I then told them I was going to fight their charges. So I went to court for 10 months every single week, where every single week I paid bribes. I bribed the judges. I bribed the public prosecutors. I bribed everyone you could think of to stay. I had to report for parole twice a week. I had to report to immigration. My life was basically tied up in this fight. After about 10 months, I believe it paid and it was all sorted, and I was going to get to a position where I would pay a series of fines. And the agreement was if I kept my mouth shut, no more politics, no more farming, I would be left to stay and I could be dad. Which was all I wanted to be at that point, was just a father to my two children. Sadly, though, on the morning of court, I realized something was amiss, just gut feeling. I walked into the courtroom, the sentence was handed down. There was a phrase that needed to be said. The phrase wasn't said. I'd paid a lot of money for it to be said. So I ended up going, instead of walking out the door as a free man, I ended up going back into prison. And this time they wanted me in there for, firstly, it was 3 months, which was their warning shot over the bow. But at the completion of the 3 months was 10 years for fraud. Yeah. So I went into prison again. Only white guy in a prison, which is an interesting concept, but I'm lucky I've got another side of me, which is more than capable of handling myself, which I have to do, and you have to do very quickly. Like any prison show you'll see on TV, the truth is you assert yourself very quickly and very aggressively. and then you click up with the biggest and the ugliest and the nicest you can. So I did that again. I was prepared to stay and fight the 10 years. I wasn't going to leave my kids. And if I had to stay in prison to do that, I was going to do it. But the turning point was the mother of my kids came to see me in prison one day. And I was dressed in about 2 strips of rag, and it was winter. So in the nights, it was about 2-3 below zero. And it was literally everything was hanging out. Like I was covering my body with 2 or 3 strips, and you get one blanket, which is pretty much lice ridden. Now I'm okay. When I say that, it sounds terrible. I'm white, so I can smuggle cigarettes in. I'm smuggling stuff through the guards. So I'm buying my way into a clique. I'm buying my way. So it is horrible, but I ain't got it anywhere near as bad as the other prison. Well, 70% of the other prisoners. The other 30% again have got money, so they're okay. And yeah, she walks in and sees me like that, starts crying in the prison yard, and then everyone starts looking at her, starts looking at me, and then I realised that, you know, this was a moment of weakness, and I shed a tear. And from that point onwards, I realised I needed to be very wary because I'd shown weakness. The mother of my kids then decided to pay some money. There was a plea offered, which is if Mr. Young wants to leave the country immediately, you can pay this amount of money and pay for a ticket, and we will usher him to the airport and he will vanish. And so that's what they did. So I got about, I think it was about 2 days warning. You're being deported forcibly. You don't have a choice in the matter. And so they did. They came with gun so that I couldn't fight it. And I met the mother of my kids at the airport with a suitcase. My kids don't know about prison, still don't know about it. They never visited me. I never wanted anyone to visit me in that hellhole. And I was deported back to Australia, a place I had lived in 15 years. Landed, and quickly, I'll just give you this, but 6 weeks later, I decided I wasn't an Australian and I didn't want to stay in Australia. So I flew back to neighbouring Mozambique on the eastern border of Zimbabwe. I got a job. Someone found out I'd been in Zimbabwe. The papers became very difficult to hold on to. But in the meantime, I illegally smuggled myself back into Zimbabwe. I crossed the border illegally, and I spent Christmas of 2019 with my children so I could say goodbye, because they'd seen me and thought they were going to see me in 2 days. And the next thing they knew, I was on a phone in Australia. You know, to this day, that what does a kid think? One minute you're with your dad and the next minute he's in Australia. Yeah, so I did that, and then the mother of my kids said she would come to Australia. So I literally went back to Mozambique, jumped on a plane, dodged bullets on the way out. It was the president's inauguration the day I departed. So there was an ambush. It was an incredible way to leave Africa. It was its way of saying goodbye to me, and don't come back, I think, was its way of
That's
saying,
one hell of a goodbye.
It was, and it was weird because the timing of that couldn't have been, it's just crazy. And so, yeah, and I came back to Australia January 20 of 2020. And then, you know, COVID hit. I still don't have my kids. The mother of my children reneged and refuses to come to Australia, even despite COVID and despite people dying in the hundreds of thousands in that country. She still believes it's a safer place to raise my children. And so, you know, what do I do with all that? Do I sit and become an alcoholic? Do I sit and feel sorry for myself? Do I take an abduction? Do I take an addict mother? Do I take crime, drugs? Do I take a failed father, you could call it, you know, in my inability to stay with my kids? Do I take prison? And do I become a victim? No, hell no. That's not what I've been put here for. It's not why any of us have been put here for. There is no traumatic experience that any of us have gone through that isn't designed and given us an opportunity to be stronger. And that's my journey now, is to take all of that you just heard and more and turn it into a positive message to support people.
Aaron, that's an incredible story. And I want to be mindful of time because, as you shared before we hit record, you've got another little baby and I know you're short on sleep. I just have one question for you. Is the greatest lesson that you've learned, your biggest takeaway through all of this, has it been acknowledging the power of choice?
That's one of my favorite words. It is exactly that. But to come to that, I had to do a couple of things. The first thing I had to do was be honest. Not honest with you, not honest with the world around me, but honest with me. And that is the number one takeaway I challenge people on. You can lie all you like to the world, but if you lie to yourself, you're in some serious trouble. Because in that lying to yourself, you're denying and suppressing. When you suppress, you get sick, whether it be mentally ill, whether it be physically ill, until you're able to voice the truth about your life and how you felt about it. Whether you don't have to have lived a story like mine. Your dog might have died when you were 4 years old, and that may have created a series of events that has haunted you up until this point that you're 45. You don't have to go to prison. You don't have to be abducted to have trauma in your life. Trauma is just a word. It's not a big negative thing. It's just an event that lingers. Yeah. And it lingers if you, and what you said the magic word, it lingers if you choose it to. Okay. That trauma happened once. It's not happening to you every day. Every day you wake up post that trauma, you have a choice to take action, to search out and find someone to help you, or to search out and help yourself. So what you've just said, that power of choice, is the most potent thing. But to get the power of choice, you've got to be honest with yourself, because we say to people, take action and there's choices. But if they're not honest, they've got no clue what the choice is. Got to find that self-honesty. And if you've got to find it right on a piece of paper the first time, that's where you start.
That makes a lot of sense. Aaron, where's the best place for people to connect with you, learn more about your story? And also you do coaching now too.
Yeah, I do coaching and I do a lot of workshop. I'm about to start offering free gratitude workshops, teaching my militant style of gratitude and all sorts of different bits and pieces. Look, my business is called Catalyst Coaching Australia. My name is Aaron Young. Find me on Facebook or Instagram. There's YouTube, Aaron Young Catalyst. I don't have a website. You look at me, I do this simply. For me, this is not about fancy, because I realize that the bulk of the world are just normal people. I may have had an interesting story, but I'm just normal people like the rest of you. I don't want to elevate myself to shininess and fancy suits and stuff. I want to keep it real, because where I am and where I've lived is the tools I offer to real people. That's what I want to keep doing. So you can look me up online, and yeah, always happy to answer a question or offer support if I can.
If you're looking at connecting with Aaron, learning more about his story and how he helps people, please check out the show notes. I'm going to have all of the links in there. And Aaron, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story.
Well, thank you, Lucy. It's a humbling experience again. I love getting this ability to open up my story and offer it freely and vulnerable. And for any man out there who thinks there's weakness in vulnerability, I can tell you right now, it's a superpower. Being able to stand up here and talk about how you feel and talk about your mistakes and your failures, it's the greatest thing you'll ever do.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Roller Coaster Podcast. Want to chat or share your ideas about today's show? Pop me an email at hello@therollercoasterpodcast.com. Don't forget to connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at The Roller Coaster Podcast. Our theme song, Roller Coaster, was performed by The Lucky Setback. Audio editing by the one and only Jeff Quigley of Quigley Creator.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride, 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 ride. Life is like